There is this prevailing theory in the entertainment industry that television is inherently transient. Shows are conceived, they have a moment, and then they're canceled. The stars fade, the networks pivot, and the cultural conversation just moves on. It's a natural life cycle. But then you have this absolute anomaly sitting at 30 Rockefeller Plaza. You have a show that's chaotic, messy, frequently declared dead by the press, and yet here we are in 2026, and it is still standing.
It's a statistical impossibility. If you actually examine the broadcast history logs, a late-night variety show launching in 1975 shouldn't have lasted 5 years.
Right.
The odds of it surviving over 50 seasons, producing more than 1,000 episodes, they're effectively zero. It defies every actuarial model for television longevity.
And that is exactly what we're here to unpack today. We're looking at the American institution that is Saturday Night Live. But we aren't just going to, list the best sketches or talk about which cast members were the funniest. We have a massive stack of sources here. Production notes, financial records, oral histories from the writer's room, even network memos. Our mission is to figure out the mechanics of its survival. How does a show that relies on producing 90 minutes of live content every single week,
Written in 6 days from scratch.
exactly, how does it actually function without imploding?
And it has almost imploded.
Yeah.
Repeatedly. The structural history of the show is defined by a cyclical pattern of crisis and reinvention. We need to examine the business decisions, the boardroom coups, that rigorous production week, and all the controversies that threaten to take it off the air.
To understand how this machine was even built, we have to go back to the vacuum that created it. We're talking 1974. To understand the birth of SNL, you have to understand that it was essentially an accident. It was born out of a scheduling crisis.
It wasn't a grand artistic vision from NBC, not initially. It was a leverage play by one man.
That man was Johnny Carson.
In 1974, he held an unprecedented amount of power at NBC. He was the undisputed king of late-night television. He was the network's primary profit engine.
And at that time, NBC affiliates were just airing reruns of The Tonight Show on weekends.
It was easy, high-margin programming. But Carson himself was experiencing burnout. He petitioned the network executives to pull those weekend broadcasts.
He effectively held the network hostage. His argument was that he wanted to bank those episodes to air during the weeknights.
Which would allow him to take more vacation time while still keeping his face on the screen. He basically told NBC, pull the weekend shows or I might walk.
And they couldn't risk that.
The network had no choice but to acquiesce. They could not lose Carson. But this decision created a 90-minute black hole in the Saturday night programming schedule, 11:30 p.m. to 1:00 a.m.
So the NBC president, Herbert Schlosser, was suddenly staring at dead air. He turns to his vice president of late-night programming, a guy named Dick Ebersol, and gives him a directive.
And the goal wasn't to create a cultural touchstone. The goal was to fill the time slot with something that would attract advertisers.
And specifically, a new kind of advertiser. The existing late-night audience was, well, it's older. Schlosser and Ebersol, they wanted the 18 to 34 demographic.
This was the post-Watergate, post-Vietnam generation. They were cynical, they were politically aware, and they were not watching the polished variety shows their parents did.
So Ebersol finds this Canadian producer named Lorne Michaels, and the pitch Michaels developed was, well, it was fascinatingly arrogant.
It was an ambitious counter-concept. Michaels pitched a show that was arguably anti-television.
What do you mean by that?
He didn't want the slick production values of the primetime variety hours. He wanted the show to feel like a party happening in New York City that you, the viewer, were just being invited to witness.
I see. More raw.
Exactly. The content strategy involved high-concept comedy sketches, political satire that punched up, and musical performances that were grittier than what was typically allowed on network TV.
So they needed a physical home for this concept. And NBC gave them Studio 8H and Rockefeller Center. Now, Studio 8H is historically significant, but for comedy, it's a nightmare.
It's a complete nightmare. It was originally built for Arturo Toscanini's NBC Symphony Orchestra.
So it's designed for music, not jokes.
The architectural design was for classical music. It's a massive floating room, literally suspended by steel cables on the 8th and 9th floors to isolate it from the vibrations of the New York City subway.
Wow.
It has these booming acoustics designed for violins and brass, not for spoken word punchlines. In a room like that, comedy can just die because the laughter gets lost in the echo.
So what did they do?
They had to spend roughly $250,000, which is over $1 million in today's money, just to deaden the sound and build the stage.
And while they were physically modifying the building, Michaels was assembling his cast. This group became known as the not ready for primetime players.
It's a name that suggests humility, but when you look at that roster, it was a murderer's row of talent.
Absolutely. Dan Aykroyd, John Belushi, Chevy Chase, Jane Curtin, Garrett Morris, Lorraine Newman, and Gilda Radner.
It's worth noting the financial reality of that first season, though. These individuals are viewed as legends now, but in 1975, they were earning $750 per episode.
$750 an episode in New York City.
After taxes and agent fees, they were taking home a working-class wage in one of the most expensive cities in the world.
Lorne Michaels has been quoted in the records saying that the cast essentially lived at the office, and this wasn't just, dedication, it was a necessity. They were sleeping on couches in the writer's wing on the 17th floor.
But that lack of resources fostered the intense insular culture that still defines the show in many ways. They were a gang. It was them against the network, them against the censors, them against the establishment.
So the premiere, October 11th, 1975, it was technically difficult. The show wasn't even called Saturday Night Live at first.
No, it was originally titled NBC's Saturday Night. This was because ABC had a competing show called Saturday Night Live with Howard Cosell.
Right. And the first episode was hosted by George Carlin. And it wasn't an immediate success.
The format was disjointed. Carlin performed his stand-up sets but didn't participate in any of the sketches, which created this strange separation between the host and the cast.
It really wasn't until the fourth episode, which was hosted by Candice Bergen, that the show actually started to find its voice.
That was the moment the audience realized they weren't tuning in for the host, they were tuning in for the cast.
And the breakout characters started to emerge. You had John Belushi's Samurai Futaba,
Which was just pure physical commitment.
and the Coneheads, which was this bizarre, brilliant satire on the immigrant experience in suburbia.
And you had Chevy Chase. In that first season, Chase was the primary driver of the show's success. He was the first anchor of Weekend Update, and he had this traditional leading man look that made his physical comedy, his pratfalls, more effective by contrast.
He understood the medium of television cameras better than the theater-trained members of the cast.
He did. But then, in the middle of the second season, Chase left. He went to Hollywood to be a movie star.
And this is what the press called the first death of the show.
The assumption was that without its star, the show would just collapse.
But this moment established the most important rule of the institution. The format is bigger than the talent. They just hired Bill Murray to replace him.
And Murray didn't try to be Chevy. He was grumpier, weirder, a little more antagonistic, and the show survived.
That resilience, though, was tested even more severely in 1980. This marks the beginning of the first major crisis period.
By the 1978-1979 season, the production was heavily impacted by burnout and a pervasive drug culture.
Yeah, the consumption of cocaine in the writer's room and among some of the cast had reached what the records call industrial levels.
It was unsustainable. The sketches were getting self-indulgent, the performances were erratic. Lorne Michaels was exhausted.
So at the end of the fifth season in 1980, he goes to the network and he asks for a hiatus. He wants a year off to recharge the creative battery.
And NBC looked at the ad revenue and refused.
So Michaels quit. And he didn't just quit. He took the entire original cast and the entire writing staff with him. He basically hollowed out the building.
The network was left with the brand name and the time slot, but no human capital. They hired a producer named Gene Dumanian to take over for the 1980-1981 season.
This period is often referred to in the histories as the Dumanian disaster.
She attempted to rapidly assemble a new cast that mirrored the archetypes of the original, but the chemistry was completely absent.
The critical reception was just vicious. The ratings tanked. And then came the final nail in the coffin.
The Charles Rocket incident.
During a sketch in February 1981, cast member Charles Rocket used the word fuck on live television.
He claimed later he was just killing time during the good nights and it slipped out, but the context doesn't really matter. It was a clear violation of FCC standards.
And it gave the network executives the justification they needed to terminate Dumanian's contract.
It was a failure of operational control. The show was, for all intents and purposes, canceled. NBC brought Dick Ebersol back, the man who had originally commissioned the show, to try and salvage it.
And Ebersol's strategy was very different. He shifted the tone away from that cool counterculture vibe.
And moved it toward broad, accessible comedy. He also made a very calculated decision to avoid political humor that might alienate viewers, specifically regarding President Ronald Reagan.
But the smartest thing Ebersol did was recognize a singular talent in the wreckage of that season. Eddie Murphy. We have to pause on Eddie Murphy. He was 19 years old.
Without Eddie Murphy, the show would have ceased to exist in 1981. He was a phenomenon.
His characters, like the cynical, cigar-smoking Gumby,
Or Mr. Robinson's Neighborhood, the inner-city parody of Mr. Rogers, they resonated immediately with a mass audience.
he was the first cast member to become bigger than the show itself while he was still on it.
He was, but Ebersol struggled to build a strong ensemble around him. So when Murphy eventually left for his film career, the void was massive.
So for the 1984 and 1985 season, Ebersol tried something radical. He broke that core rule of hiring unknowns.
He hired established comedians. Billy Crystal, Martin Short, Christopher Guest. It was called the All-Star Experiment.
And it was funny, but it was expensive, and it didn't really feel like SNL. Ebersol left after that season when the network, again, refused a hiatus request.
Which paved the way for the return of Lorne Michaels in 1985.
But his return wasn't an immediate stabilization. He initially tried to replicate Ebersol's all-star model. He hired young, established film actors like Robert Downey Jr. and Anthony Michael Hall.
It was a critical failure. It turns out that being a great dramatic actor does not mean you can handle the pressure of live sketch comedy.
The 1985 season was a mess. Michaels realized he had drifted too far from the original formula. So in 1986, he effectively canceled the show himself, fired almost everyone, and started over. This was the correction.
He returned to recruiting brilliant but largely unknown sketch technicians. He hired Dana Carvey, Phil Hartman, Jan Hooks.
Phil Hartman is so important here. They called him the glue.
Because he could hold any sketch together, no matter how chaotic it became. This era reestablished the show's credibility with critics and with the audience.
But the show is a living organism, right? It evolved again in the early 90s. This is the Bad Boys era.
You had a significant generational shift. The polished, character-driven work of Carvey and Hartman gave way to a younger, louder, more chaotic style.
Driven by Adam Sandler, Chris Farley, David Spade, and Chris Rock.
And there was significant internal tension during this transition.
Right.
The older writers and cast members viewed the newer recruits as unprofessional and their humor as unsophisticated.
That frat boy style was incredibly popular with younger viewers, but it was loathed by the critics and, crucially, by the network executives.
By 1995, the show hit another nadir. Ratings were down. The press was calling for cancellation again. An NBC executive named Don Ohlmeyer famously recommended that Michaels fire Sandler and Farley.
And in a move that seems completely insane in retrospect, given their movie careers, they were fired.
This precipitated the 1995 overhaul. Michaels hired Will Ferrell, Sherry O'Terry, and Daryl Hammond. This cast brought a kind of disciplined absurdity to the show.
Will Ferrell, in particular, had this ability to bridge the gap. He could play a straight man or a complete lunatic with equal effectiveness.
That stabilization secured the show's place heading into the new millennium.
Okay, I want to pivot now to the actual mechanics of the show. We've talked about the history, but how do they actually make this thing? We have detailed records of the 6-day production cycle, and it sounds like a form of torture.
The process is rigid and has remained largely unchanged for decades. It begins on Monday with the pitch meeting in Lorne Michaels' office.
The host is there, the cast is there. It's an intimidating environment where you have to sell your ideas to a host who might have no comedy experience.
Then comes Tuesday. Tuesday is writing night. But the reality is that it's writing all-nighter.
The writers and cast often don't even start typing until the evening. They spend the day brainstorming or, procrastinating. Then, as the deadline approaches, the panic sets in. Scripts are written overnight, often starting as late as 8 p.m. and going until the sun comes up on Wednesday morning.
Wednesday is the table read. This is the most crucial point in the week. Approximately 50 people cast, writers, producers, department heads, gather in a room.
And they read through 40 or more sketches aloud. The meeting lasts upwards of 3 hours.
This is the gladiatorial arena. If a sketch gets a laugh, it's an incredible feeling. If it gets silence, it's humiliating.
And immediately after that marathon, Michaels retreats to his office with the head writers and selects the lineup. He decides what lives and what dies. They post a list, and you see people walking down the hall to check if they have a job that week.
Thursday and Friday are for rehearsal, set construction, and rewriting. The musical guest rehearses on Thursday. The visuals are shot with the photographer Mary Ellen Matthews.
And the production crews are building these elaborate sets for sketches that might still get cut.
Which brings us to Saturday. The dress rehearsal happens at 8 p.m. in front of a live audience. This is the final test.
But here's the heartbreaking part. The show always runs long in dress rehearsal. Michaels is watching the show and the clock. And between 10 p.m. and 11:30 p.m., he makes the cut.
He cuts approximately 30 minutes of content to fit into the 90-minute live broadcast window. A writer and a cast member could have worked all week, stayed up all night Tuesday, built the set, fitted the costumes,
Only to have their sketch cut 15 minutes before airtime.
and then at 11:29 and 30 seconds p.m., the control room goes live. The technical execution required is immense.
The director, historically people like Dave Wilson or Don Roy King, and more recently Liz Patrick, is calling the shots live.
They're coordinating audio mixing, video switching on Grass Valley switchers, and cueing the actors. There is no opportunity for correction. If a mistake happens, it's broadcast to the nation.
So let's talk about the people inside that pressure cooker. The cast dynamics, the contracts, the money. The recruitment pipeline usually comes from improv institutions, right? Like the Groundlings in LA or Second City in Chicago.
The training in improvisation is essential because it teaches performers to think on their feet, a necessity for live television. Once hired, there's a clear hierarchy: repertory players and featured players.
And featured players are basically on probation with less screen time.
Correct. The compensation has also evolved significantly. We mentioned the $750 per episode in 1975.
Right.
By 2001, Will Ferrell was earning $17,500 per episode.
That is a massive jump. But the starting salary for a newer cast member, say in 2014, was reported to be around $3,000 per episode, and it increases with tenure.
But the real shift occurred in the contracts. After seeing stars like Adam Sandler and Mike Myers leave the show and generate hundreds of millions of dollars for other studios, NBC implemented a clause.
This is the Golden Handcuffs Clause.
Exactly. After 1999, this allowed the network to draft cast members into NBC sitcoms. They wanted to retain the equity in the talent they helped build. The standard contract length is typically 7 years.
And what about the hosts? You'd assume they get paid a fortune.
But the records from people like Justin Timberlake and Shane Gillis indicate that the hosting fee is only about $5,000.
It's a nominal fee. The value for the host is entirely promotional. They're there to plug a movie or an album.
And the musical guests operate under strict rules as well. Generally, lip syncing is prohibited. Lorne Michaels believes it undermines the live nature of the show.
There are some exceptions, right, for artists with intense dance routines.
Yes, but pure vocal performances must be live.
Okay, moving on to the cultural impact. You cannot discuss this show without discussing politics. The SNL effect is a real documented phenomenon.
It is. It's where the show's satire begins to define the actual politicians in the public's mind. The 2008 election is the primary case study for this.
Tina Fey's impersonation of Sarah Palin.
It was so pervasive that many voters attributed the line, "I can see Russia from my house," directly to Palin herself. In reality, that was a line written for Fey in a sketch.
Did the satire replace the reality?
In the public consciousness, yes. You saw it in the 2000 election as well. Daryl Hammond played Al Gore as a robotic lecturer obsessed with a lockbox.
And Will Ferrell played George W. Bush as a confused but lovable guy who said, strategy. Those caricatures defined the candidates for millions of voters.
The dynamic shifted significantly during the Trump era. Donald Trump actually hosted the show in 2015, which was a rating success but highly controversial.
But as his presidency progressed, Alec Baldwin was brought in to portray him, and this moved the show from being a kind of neutral satirist to an active participant in the political resistance.
It did. Trump frequently tweeted about the show, calling for investigations by the FCC and the FEC. It was a direct collision of governance and comedy.
The last few years have seen massive adjustments for the show. The COVID-19 shutdown in March 2020 must have been a logistical nightmare.
They had to produce Saturday Night Live at Home episodes remotely. Those episodes demonstrated the flexibility of the format. Cast members were filming sketches on their iPhones in their apartments.
This stripped away all the spectacle.
And relied entirely on the writing and the performance. Following the pandemic, there was a major cast exodus in 2022. Key figures like Kate McKinnon, Aidy Bryant, and Pete Davidson all departed.
And that brings us to the recent history. The 50th season ran from 2024 to 2025. The 50th anniversary special aired on February 16th, 2025.
Which was a massive 3-hour primetime event. There was a great deal of speculation that Lorne Michaels would retire after the 50th season.
But he's still there.
He is. The 2025-2026 cast, which consists of 16 members, is currently carrying the torch. But the show has not reached this point without facing some serious controversies.
Especially regarding representation.
Historically, the show had a significant blind spot regarding diversity. For a long time, the cast was predominantly white. In 2013, it came to a head.
This was with Kenan Thompson, who is, the longest-serving cast member in history?
He is, and he refused to play black female characters in drag anymore. He demanded the show hire black women.
And that ultimatum forced a structural change.
It led to the hiring of Sashir Zamata and a reevaluation of the entire casting process. Similarly, Asian representation was virtually non-existent until Bowen Yang was promoted to on-air talent in 2019.
And regarding LGBTQ plus representation, you can see a clear trajectory. In the 80s, you had Terry Sweeney, who was openly gay but was often typecast.
Whereas by 2022, you had Molly Kearney, who is an openly non-binary cast member. The show slowly, and sometimes reluctantly, updates its internal demographics to match the country.
One of the most notable modern controversies, though, was the Shane Gillis incident.
He was hired in 2019. Almost immediately, slurs he'd used on a podcast resurfaced online. He was fired just days later.
But then he came back to host.
He did. In a demonstration of the show's complex relationship with what some call cancel culture, he returned to host in 2024 and again in 2025. It suggests the show prioritizes comedy and perhaps ratings above a rigid adherence to past decisions.
We also have to mention the on-air incidents that became legendary. Sinead O'Connor in 1992.
That was a moment of unscripted protest. She tore up a photo of Pope John Paul II and said, "Fight the real enemy." The studio went completely silent. The producers cut the applause sign.
It's still one of the most significant moments in live television history. It just broke the contract of entertainment.
It did. And then you have something different like Ashley Simpson in 2004.
Right, she got caught lip-syncing when the wrong vocal track played. She did that awkward little jig and just walked off stage.
It destroyed the illusion. Both incidents, in different ways, highlight the inherent risk of live broadcasting. It's walking a tightrope without a net.
The show has also tried to extend its brand beyond Saturday night. The movies are, they're a mixed bag.
A very mixed bag. You have massive successes like The Blues Brothers, which made over $100 million, and Wayne's World. But then you have absolute disasters like It's Patton Stewart Saves His Family.
So what's the issue there?
The difficulty lies in translating a 5-minute sketch character into a 90-minute narrative. Characters that are funny in short bursts often lack the depth required for a feature film. The Blues Brothers succeeded because it was also an action movie and a musical.
The digital era changed the format again, though. The digital shorts.
Yeah.
The Lonely Island, Andy Samberg, Akiva Schaffer, Jorma Taccone, they changed the game with Lazy Sunday back in 2005.
That was the pivot point to viral content. It drove massive traffic to a very young YouTube. It shifted the power dynamic away from just the live sketches and toward pre-recorded segments that could be shared easily on social media.
And the brand has gone global. There are versions in Korea, the Middle East, Poland, and Saturday Night Live UK is set to debut on Sky Max in March of 2026.
The success of the international versions varies. The format requires a very specific cultural voice. It will be interesting to observe if the UK version can capture that specific alchemy.
So we've walked through the history, the crises, the production machine, the cultural impact. The show survived the loss of its entire cast in 1980. It survived the critical panning of 1995. It survived the internet completely fragmenting the media landscape.
The resilience creates a pattern. The show acts as a mirror to American culture. When the culture changes, the show changes, often painfully and slowly. But the live factor remains its unique selling point.
The danger that anything can happen.
That someone might say the wrong word or tear up a photo, that remains unique in a streaming era where everything else is edited and curated.
It's really the only place left on television where you can see a collective reaction to the week's events in something close to real time. Whether it's good or bad, it's present. It's a shared experience.
Precisely. It serves as a historical record of what was considered funny or important or controversial at any given moment in the last half-century.
A comprehensive look at the institution that is Saturday Night Live. Thanks for listening.